Okay, so now we're moving on to the adrenal gland. This is the second piece of the endocrine system lecture. Let's talk about where the adrenal glands are. Okay, so first of all, let's think about adrenal. What does renal mean? Renal means kidneys, so adrenal, or the adrenal glands, are going to be located on top of the kidneys. So here is the kidney, this part right here, this is the adrenal gland. And in the adrenal glands, you have two functionally different regions that secrete different hormones. So in that adrenal gland, you have the cortex. And remember, the word cortex is a broad term that just means the outer part of a solid organ. And then you have an inside here, and the word for inside in anatomy would be medulla. Okay, so you have the cortex, which is on the outside, and the medulla, which is on the inside. Now, the cortex here secretes a bunch of different hormones, and they're usually related to mineral or energy balances, whereas the inner part, the medulla, that one is going to support and reinforce the fight or flight response mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so let's go through that a little bit more detail. So remember that here's your cortex here. The hormones secreted by the cortex are all going to be stimulated by the same tropic hormone. And if it's a tropic hormone, that means that it's coming from the anterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary will secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is the hormone that controls or stimulates the adrenal cortex. Okay, so it'll come through and it'll stimulate it, and it's going to create corticosteroids. Okay, so this word here comes from the fact that if it's a steroid, that means it's made from cholesterol, and that means that it is water soluble. So these ones are going to behave the same as the water soluble ones, right? So their receptor is going to be located inside, and they're going to alter gene expression. And so they're called corticosteroids because they come from the cortex of the adrenal gland. From there, they can be further subdivided into different classifications. They can be mineral corticoids if they regulate mineral balances. Okay, for example, aldosterone, you will need to know that, especially when we get to the renal system later on. Then we have glucocorticoids. Those ones are going to be responsible for helping to metabolize glucose. So they work by increasing glucose levels in the blood. So that's cortisol. That one's going to be related to the stress response. So we'll come to that in a minute. And then we have the gonatocorticoids, and again, those are just going to be related to helping out the actions of the sex steroids. Okay, so I put a lot of information on the slide, so let me just summarize it real quick. So all of the hormones that are secreted by the adrenal cortex, those are all classified as corticosteroids. And then the three subdivisions are going to be mineral corticoids, glucocorticoids, or gonatocorticoids. Those are classifications, not specific hormones. And then the two specific hormones that you need to know are aldosterone and cortisol. Okay, so let's go into the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla, that medulla means middle, that is going to help out the fight or flight response. And so which division of the autonomic nervous system is it going to be innervated by? That would be the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so sympathetic nervous system, what it does is it triggers the fight or flight response, and to make it sort of a bigger, a longer lasting response, it'll then stimulate the adrenal medulla to secrete epinephrine primarily, but also a little bit of norepinephrine as well. Okay, so the epinephrine is going to do the same things in the body as the sympathetic nervous system did. So the same fight or flight response, increasing heart rate, dilating bronchioles, increasing mental alertness, increasing glucose metabolism, that kind of stuff. Okay, so everything that you need to do to run for your life, that is going to be That's what the epinephrine does to the body. Okay, so remember last time we talked about 3 different ways to regulate hormone levels. This would be an example of neural stimulation, where you have the nervous system causing the secretion of a different hormone, which would be the epinephrine here. Okay, so let's talk about that stress. Okay, so one thing I'd like you to understand is that stress can actually create or cause secretions of epinephrine from the medulla, but it also affects the adrenal cortex as well. Okay, so once you have stress, that'll then cause the hypothalamus to activate the anterior pituitary by releasing the corticotropic releasing hormone. Corticotropic releasing hormone. Remember, when you see RH, that means it comes from the hypothalamus. The anterior pituitary would then secrete adrenal corticotropic hormone, that then travels around until it reaches the adrenal cortex, and it causes the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Now, cortisol is a glucocorticoid, which means that its primary function is to help increase blood glucose levels so that you have a nice, good supply of energy in case, in case stress things happen, give you the energy you need to deal with the stress. But the other thing that it does is it actually inhibits the immune system as well. Okay, so high levels of cortisol for consistent levels can have a dampening effect on your body's ability to fight off the immune system. Okay, so the cortisol is good in the short term, right? It gets you ready, gives you the energy you need to deal with the stress like right now. But when you have constant chronic high levels of cortisol, that high levels of cortisol all the time, what that can do is that can actually increase your risk of type 2 diabetes, because if you have very high levels of glucose all the time, what that then does is it makes it so that the cells of your body become less sensitive to insulin. And if you're less sensitive to insulin, that means that you're unable to get the transporters to bring the glucose into the body, and that could, that's what type 2 diabetes is. Okay, so not good. Okay, and again, we've already mentioned that it suppresses your immune system, so this is especially important nowadays. Make sure you try to get your nice sleep and relax. That also is related to PTSD, right? So if you have PTSD, one thing that can happen is the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system of the brain. It's involved, the function of the hippocampus is to consolidate short-term memories into long-term memories, but the hippocampus is part of the limbic system, which means that it's sensitive to emotional stress, and it can actually be influenced by these stress hormones, specifically cortisol. And what it can do is it can impede the neurogenesis that is required to create those long-term memories. And so they can lead to memory problems and learning difficulties because of that chronic stress. Okay, so PTSD would be sort of like an extreme example, but it can cause problems with memory even in a shorter term example. So stress release. Okay, so breathe in, breathe out. Okay, so let's review some terms. Aldosterone, that one is secreted from the adrenal cortex. It is an example of, here's your choices. A hormone secreted by the adrenal cortex? Yes. A corticosteroid? Yes. A mineralocorticoid? Yes. Okay, so it's all of the above. It has multiple different classifications that it falls into. It's a mineralocorticoid because it regulates mineral balance, specifically sodium and potassium balance in the body. It's a corticosteroid because it's secreted by the adrenal cortex, which is basically A. Okay, so it's all of the above. Okay, I'm going to move on to the thyroid gland, and I'll stop